like to invite Mr. Paul Glantz to come up, and I'm going to share a little story as I'm introducing him. He looks really good with a beard, doesn't he? He obviously used like this. He shaved the day before he got here. Is that what it was? Yeah, perfect. Well, I'm going to make you stand up here for just a second while I make an introduction. But so I got to meet Paul because I did a podcast interview. One of my earlier interviews, I have a couple hundred podcast interviews now, but in my earlier ones, I had set up an interview because I wanted to meet this magnanimous man, this philanthropist, this gentleman who had this amazing, and most of you have been there, Imagine Theaters. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'm going to go meet him. He's going to have me to his theaters. And he gives me this address. And I go to this address, and it's nowhere in a theater at all. But rather, he's the CEO of Procter Financial. He took that company and grew it from $1 million to $50 million in sales. And that's what he did. That's his day job, I guess you would say, right? That's his day job. When he's not doing that, he's doing this small thing called Imagine Theaters you've heard of, right? And he's been the man behind raising over $45 million in capital for the Novi, the Canton, the Rochester, and the Royal Oak. And I think you have a couple in the workings, right?
How about Celine nearby?
Yeah, Celine's in the works. And so most of you, if you haven't been, Imagine Theaters is a great theater. It's ranked as one of the best theaters by the Detroit News for 3 years running now. It's just an amazing experience. And I'll let him tell because he tells much better story than I could ever hope to. And I think one thing that, if you get a chance to meet with Paul, just one of the most amazing men, one of the most philanthropic men that I've met with. He supports the community at all levels. And I really thank him for that because besides being a leader and a very successful business person, he's been very successful in his philanthropic efforts. And so I personally want to thank you because I know you supported some of our charities and just all that he does. So a big round of applause for Mr. Paul Glantz.
Thank you, Michael. I am certainly grateful to be here, and thank you for that warm introduction, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. And so we'll talk about the philanthropic part first. I said to my friend Marina Houghton, who's had a very successful career in public accounting with her own practice before she became the leader of the accounting department at Wayne State University's Business School. And I said to Marina, there's a responsibility that comes along with being successful, and that's to give back to society and to help those who've helped us, right? And to pull those up who might need just a little help along the way. And Marina said to me, no, Paul, it's not a responsibility, it's a privilege. And I think Marina's right. For those of us who've had the good fortune to enjoy the kind of gifts that we've enjoyed in our life and the good fortune that we've enjoyed in our lives, then I really do believe it's a privilege to be able to give back to our society. And I'll tell you this, I think it's good business. I think that when folks know that you're not just taking from society, when you're legitimately giving back and you're trying to actually help those who are perhaps in need of a little help, then I think it's really good for business. In fact, I came across something last night, and it was the narrative that was written for me back in 2011 when I had the privilege of winning the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award here in Metropolitan Detroit. And we talked about, in that, Michigan Movie Magic. In Michigan Movie Magic, some of you might remember 2009. It wasn't exactly a bright spot in our economic past. But I watched what Jay Leno had done by going to the Palace and put on free shows for folks who are unemployed, and I thought, well, we can do that too. And so we put on what we called Michigan Movie Magic, which was anyone who was unemployed in their family could come to our theater, any one of our theaters at the time, simply say they were there for Michigan Movie Magic, and they and their entire family got a free movie, free soda, free popcorn. And I'll tell you, it was the most gratifying thing I've ever done in terms of philanthropy. When someone is down on their luck, and clearly, I mean, some of the emails actually brought a tear to my eye. The smallest, most seemingly immaterial act of kindness can elicit some really wonderful gratitude, and that's what we enjoyed. And so I'm proud of that little episode in my past. My chief of staff, Anthony Laverde, is here tonight, and Anthony can tell you that I do not bat 1,000. I'm lucky to bat 750 recently, but the fact is that when we do right by the community certainly does right by us. So I'll go back and start way back when, and you might say, well, why is Paul here tonight? I'm here tonight because my parents love me. Flat out, my parents loved me, and they told me I could be anything I wanted to be in life. Without that love and support, I would not be here tonight. And so the reality is this. if we can envision it, if we can see our future, if we can be told, if we believe that we can accomplish anything, then indeed I think we can. And so I was very, very fortunate to have been born to a mom and dad who just adored me. They loved me. And they didn't have a lot of money, so I was very fortunate to get a scholarship to Wayne State University where I studied accounting. But I'll tell you a little bit about Imagine and how we first got started. Going back to the mid-'80s, and I think the reason I was invited, because I'm an old fart and I could tell war stories, right? But going back to the mid to late '80s, I was a young CPA at the time, one who was absolutely convinced that I knew everything there was to know about business. However, there was one minor problem. Didn't have two nickels to rub together. So, then partner and I at the time looked at all kinds of little business opportunities. Family restaurants, dry cleaners, you name it. I found an ad for this one-screen movie theater. And you know what? We just bought it right. We were able to buy it at 2 times pre-tax cash flow. It's kind of hard to mess it up. And it was really important that we not mess it up. You know why? The source of capital, and I think the angel investors in here will appreciate this, the source of capital for that first business was $50,000 we borrowed on our credit cards and $75,000 we borrowed from the bank. Now, why the bank ever did it, I don't know. We didn't tell them the equity was coming from the credit cards. Anthony, sometimes you forget those things, right? And so, believe it or not, I became a student of the industry. We'd go to industry conventions, we'd travel, and it was about being a sponge. It was about learning everything we could learn. And of course, I'm a big believer that by listening carefully and keeping your ear to the ground, you can, in fact, assimilate knowledge. Great story about that we have the privilege of telling you that we were the first all-stadium seating theater in the state of Michigan. It's only because we opened 2 weeks before Star Southfield. And we started construction after Star Southfield. But again, we opened first. The story is that we originally designed what was Cinema Hollywood, today Imagine Birch Run, with slope floors, because that's how they designed it back then. While we were out at an industry convention at the time in Atlantic City, we had the privilege of sitting down and talking to a gentleman who's truly, to this day, considered an expert in our industry. And I said to Wayne, if you were building a theater today, what would you do? And Wayne sort of thought about it for a while. He said, well, I think if I was going to do one today, I'd do it with stadium seating. Now, it was a turning point in our lives because, candidly, I don't think we would have enjoyed the success we enjoyed without that characteristic. And many of you in this room will say, well, of course you had stadium seating. Well, whatever preceded that. But before that, you might remember, if you weren't 6 feet tall, or if there was a woman with big hair in front of you, it was hard to see the screen. And so it was a paradigm shift in our industry. We were very fortunate to be on the front of that paradigm shift. Now, the little sidebar story that goes with it is that our original angel investor, happens to be an attorney, Michael, okay, who was committed to this program. And when we came back from Atlantic City, we said, the price has gone up because we have to build this stadium seating. And Gordon pulled out. It was okay. I thought it was okay. It was okay until Gordon said later he was going to sue me, right? So he pulled out temporarily. The fact is, I learned at that point in time, very shortly thereafter, that I was auditioning. I was auditioning years earlier, and I didn't realize I was auditioning. But I was working in public accounting for a really terrific guy. His name was Jim Hahn. And Jim was my manager at Ernst & Young. And apparently, and I can only say apparently, but Jim must have found me to be trustworthy, a man of character, someone that he would entrust his hard-earned money to. Because Jim and his friend Dale committed $450,000 to what was then Cinema Hollywood, today Imagine Birch Run, in 1996, when honestly, most everybody in this room today would go, really? Why would they have done that? But it was an act of faith. It was an act of faith, in my opinion, that was predicated upon knowing me as a man of character. And I believe that that's really an important characteristic in our lives, is to conduct ourselves with integrity. And so sure enough, that $450,000 was what really kick-started the business. And I am eternally grateful to those two gentlemen. Sadly, we lost Dale a couple years ago. But Dale and Jim are in every single theater we've ever built. Not everyone has been a financial success, although we're still working on those that aren't, and we will make them a success, I promise you, because giving up is not part of my character. Not giving up. Relentless, I think it's the term I used in the car on the way over here. And I think that's the way you have to be when you're an entrepreneur. I think you have to be relentless. Because folks will tell you, why would I do that? Doesn't seem reasonable. And don't get me wrong, we can make mistakes. I make more than my fair share. That was an important lesson. I realized that I had been auditioning early in my career. In the early 80s, I was auditioning with Jim, and Jim and Dale were the angels that got us going. And since then, it's been the friends and family approach. I've never really done a pitch for money other than to folks that I already had some relationship with. Folks who knew me or were referred to me by folks they knew. And to this day, I now have the privilege of having folks call me and say, we heard you're going to build a theater in Heartland. Can we get in? And so I'm just the luckiest guy on earth. That's really my story. Luckiest guy on earth. Now, success is not a straight trajectory upward, is it? Plenty of bumps along the way, plenty of challenges. And I have faced a couple. So when we opened Imagine Novi in 2002, we discovered something that's really difficult in business. It's difficult in life. And you know what that is? When you discover that you don't know what you don't know. And what I didn't know in 2000, when we decided to build Imagine Novi, is that the guy across the street, who had this really deplorable, sticky floor, hidden theater, his dad was in the business going back to the 30s. So guess what? My competitor, who had a product that didn't begin to meet the expectations of that marketplace, was able to play keep away with films. We opened Imagine Novi in October of 2002 with 18 screens and half of the feature releases. Now, that's where liquor came in handy. Not just my own consumption of liquor, but liquor consumption by my guests, thank God. We weren't exactly hitting our patron projections, as you can imagine, with half the feature films, right? But we had been modest in our forecast of average concession revenue, which I don't want to tell you, it's not a secret, and even if I'm on film, it's where all the money's made. And that's what got us through. Now, what also got us through is I had made some money in the insurance business by then, because I dug down to the point where I was on fumes in my wallet to fund the operating losses. And in fact, I'm not even proud of it to this day, because I think back and thought and realized that I could have been throwing good money after bad. But it was a point in my life where I knew we hadn't picked a bad location. I knew the marketplace was receptive to the product. I knew that we had a good picture, good sound, presentation that was well laid out. And so it just really ground me to think that the next owner is going to make this work. So I was very fortunate. We'd stuck it out. But Michael pointed out that the movie theaters are just one component of my business life. And it's my hobby. And you might say, well, that's kind of odd having a $60 million a year plus revenue hobby. But I'm a terrible golfer, so what else can I do, right? Getting involved in the movie industry was plan B. While I was working at Procter Financial in the mid-90s as the CFO, we were on hard times. We were on hard times for a couple reasons. We had a young leadership team that didn't know how to make money, count myself among them. We had gone through 2 leverage buyouts to provide for succession of ownership in a family business. And the accounting results, the financial performance was abysmal. By this time, my wife Mary is no longer working outside the home. Got 2 young sons who like to eat. And I'm thinking, Dad, you got to be a provider. You got to find a way to feed this family. And so, you know, even though I could have practiced public accounting, and I did try that for a while, by the way, without a lot of success, really getting involved in the movie business in a more substantial manner was my plan B. It was my way out in case Procter cratered. And if you had asked me back in 1996, when we were planning Cinema Hollywood, what are the chances that 21 years from now, you'll have a $65 million hobby and you'll be president of Procter Financial? I would have given you exactly 0 odds, because I thought it was binary. It was A or B. And I certainly thought A was going away. So I've been so fortunate again to have bosses who've tolerated this. Can you imagine? Hard to come by, isn't it? It's almost impossible. and so, you know, I just every day I pinch myself and go, why haven't they fired me yet? But I think the real answer is they haven't fired me yet because I've had the privilege of being surrounded by people who just make me look good. And so my job, of course, today is to set the tone from the top. It's to create a culture of excellence. And more than anything else, the most important thing that I look for and what I really expect from my teammates is empathy. We have to, at all times, think about how others feel. How are you making other people feel? And so at Procter Financial, it's a challenging, specialized business. We're essentially working with defaulted mortgage borrowers, and they're saying, I can't afford to buy my insurance. And believe me, I don't doubt it, that they can't afford to buy their homeowner's insurance. And so we have to demonstrate empathy. We have to genuinely care. And so one of the other really ugly things we do at Procter is we help people administer construction draws, rebuilding their homes after a claim. And so, for example, if you have a mortgage on your home, there's something on your insurance policy called a mortgagee clause. Well, the first time 99% of homeowners find out that when they have a major homeowner's claim that they're going to get a joint check with their mortgage lender, they're not real happy, because their perspective is, and rightly so, this is my insurance, I paid for it, I expect to have the money to repay my home, to rebuild my home. Well, that's all true, but we all know that your lender has an interest in that property as well, and they want to see it's restored. And so we deal with people in really difficult circumstances. And I've got a parallel life. And you might think, well, Paul, Procter's business to business and Imagine's business to consumer. But think about the parallels. We try to give thought and think about our guests at Imagine in the same vein. How can we make the experience exemplary? How can we be sure that folks leave satisfied? And again, I won't tell you for a minute that we're hitting on all 8 cylinders at all times. I think we're winning more times than we're losing, but there are times when we can be more empathetic, then we can be more sensitive to the needs of our guests, and we can do the same at Procter. I genuinely believe that that's the key. When you genuinely care about the needs of others, when you put the interests of others ahead of your own, inevitably you're both very successful. And in fact, you might ask me, you know, you talked about a partner. And I did have a partner early on. And about 12 years ago, my partner called me and said, I won't use the whole word, but it started with an F. The investors were probably not going to do any more deals with him anyway. That was a problem for me, big problem for me. Because you know why? I'd raised all the money. And people had entrusted their hard-earned money to me. And so the last thing I was going to do was to mistreat our investors. It was challenging times. We had half the films. We had all the debt. But you know what? The investors got paid. They've had all their capital returned to them. My management fee has been restored. And guess what? those are the same investors that have grown with us since then. And so putting our management fees ahead of the investors would have been something of poor character, in my opinion. And so it was sad because we were best friends. But I had to draw the line at that point in time because it was a matter of character. When you take money from others, you have a fiduciary responsibility to look after their hard-earned capital. And maybe, just maybe, I am so protective and deem capital to be so precious because I came from no capital. So when you have no capital and you need it, then of course it's precious. So that's my story. I believe in the sanctity of capital. And I'm in a capital-intensive business. Without those who've entrusted their hard-earned money to us, we would have nothing today. And so I often think it's not our operating prowess, it's not our managerial skill, it's their capital. Because without that piece of the puzzle, where are we? We're nowhere. And so when you're so fortunate to gain more investment capital, which I think you will, hope you'll think about it in the same fashion. Because it truly is precious. It's a gift. People that believe in you early in your business careers and early in your entrepreneurship journey, those are the people that you can rely on, and those are the folks you'll be, like me, thanking later in your careers.
Big round of applause for Paul.